through our education efforts the past 10 to 12 years, this year we just got news that one of our students actually got accepted into Columbia University in New York, which is a big deal. And in September this year, he'll be flying to Columbia. We run quite a number of empowerment and skills, empowerment and self-resilience programs as well. What does this often looks like? You know, we currently have a sewing program for the refugee community where we work with a bunch of Burmese ladies who have to stay home for one reason or another, right? They either have very young children and daycare is simply too expensive, or they are single moms, you know, having flat abusive relationships. We work with women to sew, to bake, and to create. Basically, we run entrepreneurship programs, you know, just so that women, like this woman here, who has a kid, you know, and can't afford school fees, is able to find a job but spend time with the child at the same time. A big part of our work also looks into protection and advocacy. We do a lot of lobbying with the government, with stakeholders. We lobby for increased rights for refugees. We lobby for better conditions of detention centers. We lobby for, we are part of a network that lobbies for refugee and migrant children to be removed from detention centers simply because children shouldn't be spending time in detention centers. A lot of our protection advocacy work also looks into going into detention centers whenever refugees get arrested and detained unlawfully, and this happens on quite a regular basis. I'm not sure if you have, you know, if you're very much aware with the news that's happening. I'm not sure if you've seen videos of refugee flats in which refugees and migrants often stay in getting raided at 11 p.m. at night or 2 a.m. in the morning. It's pretty horrifying. It's very violent break-ins into homes, hauling people together like animals, arresting them, you know, simply because of their documentation or lack thereof. So a lot of the work that we do looks into seeing how we can look into better protection policies for refugees, because at the end of the day, they did not choose to be in Malaysia. It's not a choice to become a refugee. And I often wonder, what if we were to become refugees one day? And lastly, we look a lot into community building and integration. A big part of our community building and integration work really looks at seeing how we can not just find ways, you know, to champion communities, but how do we integrate them with our local communities. These pillars guide our work alongside two overarching thoughts. Number one, how do we dignify communities as they receive aid? And number two, how do we bridge the power gap and create meaningful collaborations? Over the years, we have shifted our approach from simply helping refugees to working alongside them. Today, we have a committee representing 5 different nationalities and 6 sub-tribes from refugee communities, where we bounce off ideas with them, ensuring that the project that we develop as an organization aligns with their needs and bring real value. Embracing this approach, you know, we have launched powerful advocacy campaigns, such as the Chin Up Project, where, you know, when the UN came up with the Chin Session policy, we lobbied against it. As organizations, we were ineffective, but when we partnered across a few stakeholders and with the refugee community, within less than a year, we got to overturn the Chin Session policy. If you're curious about it, you can read up more about the Chin Up Project. I believe that the website is still available. We also have an ongoing program called the Dari Dapur program. Dari Dapur in translation means from the kitchen, where we work with refugee and migrant communities to film them cooking dishes that represent home. And to the table, we invite individuals like Chef Wan, Nurul Iza, Lisa Surihani, where together with Malaysian household names and refugee and migrant communities, we get to enjoy a meal together and find friendship through food. And one of the reasons why we started Dari Dapur program is simply because we wanted to show that migration is for everyone, whether you're a refugee or you're a migrant, but how do we find commonality through embracing each other and being humane and kind to one another. I share with you all this, you know, I see, you know, the signboard going up. But I share with you all this really to convey that the past 11 years of running Refuge for Refugees have been, it's been great in so many ways, but it's also been incredibly challenging. I faced multiple charges and investigations from the government. Some of you guys might know this. I've endured cyberbullying, stalking. I've even been targeted by human traffickers during our work against human trafficking. I've witnessed multiple suicide cases and horrors of humanity at its worst. Yet amidst it all, one of the most significant lessons I've learned is that in leading the organization is that leadership must come from the heart. When we do work with the community, we need to lead from the heart. Academic brilliance alone can only take us so far. What we truly need is smart individuals who are also kind and compassionate. We need those who can design solutions while considering the human aspect of today's most pressing problems. As I conclude my talk, I want to emphasize that if you're considering getting involved in a social impact scene, you already possess everything you need to start. I mean, this was really, I was thinking about the students in Taylor's, regardless of your background, a lot of times we think that we need to be in law or international business to look into non-profit work or charity work. But regardless of background, if you've got a business background, go build a business, that creates social impact. Beyond running Refuge For Refugees, I'm also part of a social enterprise called Pink Collar. Pink Collar is Malaysia's first ethical recruitment agency for migrant workers looking to place migrant workers into safe jobs debt-free. How many of you know that migrant workers in Malaysia often pay anywhere between 8 to 12,000 ringgit to secure a job in the country, only to be overworked and underpaid? 8 to 12,000 ringgit. Just a couple of months ago, I had to raise funds for 600 Nepali and Bangladeshi workers that were stuck in Negeri Sembilan because they were trafficked across the borders. They paid 8 to 12,000 ringgit to secure a job in Malaysia, only to have their visas taken away from them, their passports, their mobile phones. They were basically stuck in a hostel with 300 other people, with no food, no water, no job opportunities, and a huge debt. But this is a reality of Malaysia. So Pink Collar exists, to try to tackle ethical recruitment, to look into ethical recruitment, to see how we can place migrant workers into safe jobs. And we don't just do it as a business, right? We ensure that we train workers and place them well in companies so that it benefits both parties. But today, the world has evolved so much that businesses can be so much more impactful. You don't just need to be a non-profit to make a difference. You can be a business with an impact as well. For those with an education background, I think there's some lecturers in the room. I know that my life was changed because of educators that believed in me and that invested in me. And there are, for those that are thinking about education, there are fantastic programs out there, that you can join, like Teach for Malaysia and Pemimpin KL. Teach for Malaysia looks into placing quality teachers into low-performing schools, and Pemimpin looks into training up head teachers across all schools, right? But, with this, there is so much more that we can do collectively, where we look into the impact of education as a whole. So my message as a wrap-up is simple. I think all of us here can find someone to be successful for, someone that needs us to rise up for them. If anything, go back thinking about this. Who can we be successful for today? Who can we rise up for? Whose needs can we meet because of the experience and the backgrounds that we have? In closing, I want to share another one of my favorite quotes, one that hangs on my bedroom wall. It says, "How we walk with the broken speaks louder than how we sit with the great." And I hope it's something that we think about often. I mean, I say this with experience of, meeting royalties, meeting the Queen, meeting Prince Harry and Prince William, and so much of my work involves just meeting high-ranking professionals, right? But at the end of the day, the one thing I tell my team is 70% of our time needs to be spent on the ground. In order for our work to be effective, we need to spend that time on the ground. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for a great sharing and an eye-opening about what are the impacts of your work towards the community. So we're going to open the floor for a Q&A. If you have any question, you can raise up your hand, please.
If you guys are interested in volunteering or joining the team, here is the link. Please join us. We need more people on the ground. Yeah, but questions?
Yes. Okay, I'm Dr. Mogana from the Taylor's Law School. Thank you very much for your talk, Ms. Quah. My question is on education and skill development that you are campaigning as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and you said that there are community schools based, what you call as informal education for these refugee children.
Yeah.
And you also said that you're offering training for the teachers.
Yeah.
My question is our government in any way, interested in this informal education of the refugee children and the training of the teachers? Are there any policies, guidelines that you need to follow, or are you all doing it by yourself? And how do you go about handling this informal education? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Because Malaysia is a signatory to the Refugee Convention Protocol, to the Geneva Convention, refugees in Malaysia basically cannot access education. We have tried talking to the government. At the moment, these community-based schools that we run cannot be supported or recognized by the government. And this is why, one of the reasons why we don't use government syllabus as well, right? But yeah, there is, I think the conversation has been shifting with the government the past couple of years. There is increased interest in thinking about allowing refugees to access formal education, but we're not there yet. And it's something that we're actively campaigning and lobbying for. So these refugee schools in general are not formal in any sense. They're not recognized by the government. They're only recognized by UNHCR. So each of these schools that we go to has a UNHCR letter of protection on our walls, just so that when the authorities come, they know that this is a UNHCR recognized school and they might not cause too much trouble. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
All right, thank you. We have one question over here.
Hi, Heidi. Obviously not a student. I was a student here in 75 when it was old Taylor's College, and today my daughter is running around all over the campus. Heidi, Lord, your great efforts in supporting the refugee cause. I come from Rotary, and in 2019, we had a seminar on refugees, talking about the 4 rights. We got the World Bank involved, UNHCR, and Katwan was there when she was the Deputy Prime Minister, and we got the members of the old cabinet at that time, and we said, we had so many organizations. They're all working in silos towards refugee cause. We wanted to form an alliance, perhaps an allied group where you have the refugees from Afghanistan, from Somalia, and all over the world supporting the Myanmar cause. And there's so many of us. Could we perhaps still have a relook at how we can do it together to make that impactful thing rather than everyone supporting? Like, for instance, my Rotary Club supports this Myanmar Children Community Learning Center for the past 10 years, supporting the teacher, paying her a stipend, and today she's off to Australia and so happy that she's got a place in Australia. But certainly the International Rescue Committee, UNHCR, organizations such as your organization and so many others let's come together and see whether we can make that impact and talk to the government. Now we've got a unity government. We're talking about Malaysia Madani. Could we now leverage on that and see what we can do together? Yeah? Thank you.
No, thank you so much for that. I definitely agree that there needs to be more coordination, a more united front, and this is something that we often tell partner organizations as well, right? We can't lobby for the rights of refugees if we don't have a united front and if we don't work collaboratively together. The problem is, which is a conversation that we need to have as a whole community, is that everyone sees, because of the limited funding and limited opportunities available, everyone sees each other as competition of sorts, right? But the truth is, if we're serving the same cause, there shouldn't be a need for a competition of rivalry. So I think that, we need to relook at this and see how we can come together as a more united front. I say this, in reflection that in the groups that I've been part of, there's always people with different levels of experience, right? And everyone feels that there is only one specific way to campaign effectively, one specific way to support refugees community effectively. But the truth is, I think it takes all of us, our different forms of expression, to really champion the community together. So I think there needs to be a stronger body that pulls everyone together to see how we can work collaboratively across the board to ensure that we serve refugee communities the way that actually supports them. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Heidi. My name is Andrew Koo. I have 2 questions for you, one looking back and one looking forward. So looking back, in all the work that you've done, now that you've known what you've gone through, is there anything that you would have done differently in order perhaps to best or better prepare you for the challenges that you have experienced? So that's the looking back question. The looking forward question is that a couple of days ago, the Minister of Higher Education came out and said that there's no risk, no security threat to Malaysia to allow Rohingyas to enter local universities. do you see that as a positive development? For the first time, perhaps a politician is coming out openly to admit that. And the question really is, where is the disconnect? If there is political will, or at least some political will, to allow refugees, maybe in this particular case, Rohingyas, to enter the local education system, is there pushback from the national security apparatus, the bureaucrats that run national security, who seem to be opposed to that? And so how do we move forward? How do we address this apparent difference or dichotomy of views between politicians on one hand and the national security bureaucrats on the other?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. Probably just addressing the first question first. I think definitely, right? When we first started running Refuge for Refugees, I think a lot of it was just gathering individuals, locals like myself, right? To go like, hey, what can we do for the refugee community, right? And a lot of it comes from us without involving the refugee community. So that was, I think, our approach for the first 5-6 years, thinking of like, how can we help the refugee community? How can we push for certain programs? You know, how do we push for certain access to education for refugee communities without considering what do they actually want? Because our cultures are so different, right? I mean, we come from the urban city. They often come from villages, right? So I think, you know, a lot of the initial years was spent pushing for programs that we didn't know if, yes, some of it impacted and benefited the communities. Some of them were not the most helpful. I think because of that, we've learned to shift our response over the past couple of years to adopt more of this thing called accountability to affected populations. It's a term that is very broadly used and in the US right now, right? How do we be accountable to affected populations? By including them and involving them in creating solutions for the ongoing problem. And in doing so, I think we learned so much more. We learned to run programs that are a lot more effective, and because of that, we got to save on a lot more resources. I don't know if you've got, you know, many of you guys have experience running programs in the community, but imagine trying to push for something that people don't really need, and there's a lot of effort that's being put into it, but very little uptake and very little ownership, and that's often frustrating. That's one of the reasons why the 2016 pilot for refugees, there was a pilot program that allowed refugees to work in Malaysia that failed miserably because we didn't first consider what refugees wanted in the first place. We didn't even consider their backgrounds, their education, their expertise. We just thought of like, hey, you know what? I mean, the government at that point of time thought like, hey, you know what? We should legalize and allow refugees to work, and this is a pilot campaign, so we're just going to take a bunch of Rohingya refugees and chuck them far away from families, right? And there was very little uptake because they didn't think about, you know, separating families once again and the impact of it. They didn't think about the backgrounds or the skills that these refugees had to contribute. So I think, you know, in response to that, I think that's something that we've been reflecting a lot over the years, you know, over the recent years, right? How do we include refugees in creating solutions with us? And I think that has really helped us campaign and do better through our programs. In relation to your second question, I think that, I mean, we're in a current government now that seems a lot more open, which is great. I think there are conversations around access to education for refugee children, right? There are conversations now that seems more open to allowing refugees to work in Malaysia because, you know, there is a huge labor shortage. So I think that's very, very positive. I think the concern still comes from the National Security Council, right? And the fear-mongering that comes every time, you know, elections are around the corner, you know, trying to bait that refugees are dangerous and refugees are not safe. So I feel how we can kind of bridge the gap is to tackle this fear that people have with proper statistics and data, right? Engage in meaningful conversations. I feel that we're in a time where we don't have enough meaningful conversations. So there's a lot of fear-mongering that's happening without avenues to properly have effective conversations. And when people realize that refugees are not an actual threat, I think they will be able to be more welcoming towards the refugee and migrant communities. Sorry, Andrew, I hope I answered your question one way or another.
All right, Heidi, we have one last question and we can wrap up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bharati. Yeah, there are two things, right? One is that, just want to share an experience of a case that we handled. That I'm just trying to pinpoint the role of the employers and also the role of the government or the state, right? So this particular a refugee, right, had an accident, a workplace accident. But instead of sending this person to a hospital, he was sent back to home. There was no treatment or nothing. It was like a burnt from thighs. And he was just recovering, not even, you know, there's no proper medical access and the fear of state repercussions and so on and so forth. So how do we move forward? I mean, bringing in the role of the employers, you know, putting them into accountability or taking responsibility over the employees and so on and so forth, especially the refugees. And second, when I was authoring this report, right, I remember that you were called in for investigation, right? Do you see things are changing, or does that kind of situations, you know, impose the self-restrictions or self-censorship when it comes to criticism against the state or the government? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, maybe to answer the second question first. With the current government, I mean, I was charged once last year, 2 years ago, and I was supposed to be charged again this year, even though the new government was voted in February. But because of a public statement that was pushed out, and because of the traction that was gained, you know, with the public holding politicians accountable, that was dropped, right? So I don't think there has been a lot of a shift in terms of how the current government is responding, but I think the Rakyat are holding our government more responsible in doing things right, and I think we're on the right track for that. Yeah, so so I do think that there is a bit more. Has there been more people that are scared of speaking up? Surprisingly not. I think I'm really hopeful for our current generation and even just the generation like the Gen Zs, right? We see a rise of younger, fresher, bolder voices that are ready to speak up for what is right, regardless the cause. And I think we need to do, I mean, as people who are older, right? I think we need to do all that we can to champion those voices, because, you know, if we enter into a generation where people are scared to speak up, like nothing will progress and nothing will move. In relation to your first question about, you know, the responsibility of employers. So from what I've learned recently, actually all refugees and migrants, regardless whether you're right to work, actually deserve access to justice of sorts. But there has to be a clear representation of a paper trail that shows that this person was actually hired to work. By right, the employer should have taken responsibility, and it is on the employer to take responsibility. And for future cases like that, when employers don't take responsibility, what individuals can do or members of the public can do is to come to organizations like ourselves, right, or Tenaga Nita, who has a booth out there, because we have lawyers that will be able to seek access to justice for workers that get hurt at work. Sorry, I'm just a bit distracted by the signboards that are flashing up. But I guess in conclusion, you know, there is so much more. I mean, I've really enjoyed speaking to you guys and answering your questions. I'll be hanging around. So if you guys have any, you know, remaining questions left, please feel free to come and have a conversation. And I think in just to wrap up, I feel that there's so much more that we can do to champion and to support refugee and migrant communities, right? And just a closing thought, you know, I think while we want to think about how do we champion and support refugee communities, we need to be sure that our help for the refugee, our support is sustainable in the long run. So I was just briefly having a conversation with a few different individuals prior to this, right? There is always, have you guys ever read of this book called When Helping Hurts? It's a book that you can think about reading about, because when help is not done in a way that is effective, or it's always touch and go, it actually does more harm to the community than good. So when we think about supporting and championing communities, let's think about, first of all, the sustainability of our work, but second of all, how do we include them in a conversation when designing programs or solutions together? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Heidi, for the session. I think we learned a lot in terms of what are the awareness and also the narrative that was created surrounding the migrants and the refugee in the country. I think it's very important also for us to also consider when we talk about Bangsa Malaysia, who are the people that we want to be, we have to be inclusive with, and these are the works that we want to support, especially moving forward. And I'm really glad to hear when Heidi said we are moving into the right direction when it comes to making these changes and creating a new narrative where we are more inclusive and acceptable of the members of the country. All right. Thank you so much, Heidi, again, for the wonderful sharing. And then I would like to also announce that we are also having booth upstairs, so you can check at LT21. We have booth from Awam, we have CIJ, Minda Kami, where they do mental health screening, Epic Homes, and a lot more. So please visit. It's at the second floor outside of LT21. And then next, we also have a forum on IPCMC now addressing violence and death in custody. So if you're interested to watch for the next session, please please confirm your registration, and also please scan the QR code and provide us with feedback, and it is something that we can work on in the future. Thank you so much for your time today, and for the audience on live stream, we will see you later during the next forum. Thank you.